Before I just hit record, can you guys all say hi just so that I can make sure it's not recording too loudly and you guys are all muffled?
Hello.
Fine. Hello, hello.
Okay. Pippa, you want to go again just because you're going to be
Okay.
on the call?
Hi.
All right, we're good.
Looks good.
We're good. So I'm going to start the call with a disclaimer like I do every other call. This audio is brought to you by John Bumpus and the Nutritional Balancing Friends Facebook group. And Pippa, please remember that none of the products, claims, or programs from this call have been evaluated by any government health body. The content and information found within this audio from John Bumpus, attendance of this group call, and in our affiliated Nutritional Balancing Friends Facebook group is for informational purposes only. The content is in no way intended as a medical advice, as a substitute for medical counseling, or as treatment cure for any disease or health condition, and nor should it be construed as such because that would be illegal. Always work with a qualified health professional before making any changes to your diet, supplement use, prescription drug use, lifestyle, or exercise activities. Please understand that you assume all risks from the use, non-use, or misuse of this information. Thank you.
Next time.
Say amen or something now.
Sorry?
All right, don't worry.
So sugar.
Yeah, so Pip, what was Meg's question? Can you read it out for us?
Again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hi Erin, I actually have a question. I read in your story that you started eating the maple syrup at some point and it really helped you. Could you tell a bit about how often you took it? I actually took some organic blackstrap molasses today and felt really good afterwards, so I'm interested in maybe trying something similar. Smiley face. That's it.
Do you want to comment on that, Erin?
Me.
She asked you.
So, I can't remember exactly what it was that improved because it was about 2.5 years ago. However, I do know that when I first started taking it, I was taking about a teaspoon to a tablespoon, up to a tablespoon, I was told. And I definitely started feeling better. I think it was like either it was clearing up brain fog or it was clearing up just energy levels. I was having a lot of gut problems at the time. I was doing a lot of ketogenic diets and I was doing a lot of nootropics because I was doing a labor hire job and it was really physical. So I was using a lot of energy and I was just really struggling to eat the amount of food I needed without having the carbs and sugars every day. Yeah, so John got me on that. So he might be able to remember a little bit around the same time. If you want to comment, John?
Yeah, so basically Erin at the time was working a high labor job, as she said, and she was struggling with a lot of fatigue. And it's very common, people that are tired, right? That's one of the major reasons why people get interested in mineral balancing. But she was pretty much working upwards of like 8 to 12 hours, sometimes physical labor.
And I would
And
start at different times of the night and day.
so she was all over the place with her physical activity. And one of the reasons why I initially mentioned for her was to add sugar was pretty much because I feel like she had depleted her glycogen stores. And hey, Michelle. Yeah, anyway. So yeah, she pretty much depleted her glycogen stores and she was running around all the time. So I had suggested that she did have a little bit of sugar when she did add the sugar in, which was a big for her because she thought sugar was evil. And when she added in just a tablespoon to her morning coffee, she told me right off the bat that she felt a lot better. And I think you actually like felt happier, didn't you?
I think so. I could go back into our messenger history and have a look because right now John and I are also applying for a visa, so we've been going through our messenger history, so I could probably find out exactly what happened.
Okay.
So John has prepared a lecture.
I didn't do a lecture. I got some information that I kind of got to outline because if we're going to talk about some of the stuff, like I mentioned glycogen, and glycogen basically is the stored sugar in the body. So it gets stored primarily in the liver and the skeletal muscle, and the body can store up to like almost a pound of sugar, which is quite a lot. So I just wanted to cover some definitions a little bit because we're going to talk about some stuff and you might not know what they mean. And there's blood that has sugar in it, and that is glycemia, right? There's glucose in the blood. Some people have high blood sugar. It's called hyperglycemia. Some people have low blood sugar, and that's called hypoglycemia. You probably hear a lot of the time people get hangry or hungry and angry at the same time, among other symptoms, and that's usually correlated with hypoglycemia. Hyperglycemia is more along the lines of diabetes and different. They're adding a whole bunch of different types of diabetes now. There's type 1, type 2, and pre-diabetes, and gestational diabetes, and they're just trying to subcategorize it because they're anal about doing stuff like that. So basically, diabetes is like the chronic illness that most people are familiar with at one point or another. It affects pretty much the body's ability to create energy. The blood sugar itself is usually high, and that's why they usually say like for diabetics not to consume any sugars because their blood sugar is high. But allopath kind of mind states pretty much see high blood sugar and they think, oh my God, the blood is high, so we must take out sugar completely. Whereas the point of the blood is really to deliver nutrients to cells. And the real problem with diabetes is that the cells aren't picking up the sugar so that it can properly use this sugar as a fuel source to create energy. So when you eat fuel or when you eat food, you pretty much break down that food into glucose. It goes, through your stomach to your intestines, and it stimulates your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin is pretty much the big drug that they like to sell for people with diabetes, and it pretty much helps move glucose from the bloodstream into muscle, fat, and the liver so that you can have glycogen, along with other, they call them factors. It sounds kind of lame, but along with other factors, such as like glucose tolerance factor, this pretty much allows insulin to enter into cells so that the cell can create energy. And that's the allopathic kind of way of having a solution to the problem. So most diabetics produce some insulin, but usually they don't produce very much. And you probably heard the term insulin resistant, which means that their cells are not actually answering the door when insulin knocks to allow glucose into it. So pretty much without insulin entering the cell, you get a buildup of sugar in the blood, and that's diabetes, hyperglycemia, all that kind of stuff. You get usually sugar cravings, excessive thirst, excessive hunger, poor wound healing. They get a lot of things like chronic inflammation kind of stuff. And fatigue is like one of their major things because they can't create energy, so they're tired. Metabolic syndrome is like another classification that kind of come up. It's basically a collection of different conditions like diabetes or heart disease and things like that. High blood pressure, high blood triglycerides, stuff like that. Insulin resistance, they call it metabolic syndrome because it's a bunch of stuff and they don't know what to do about it. I don't know if I really want to talk about like all the different aspects of like, carbohydrates and simple carbs and complex carbs. I'm not going to go into every single classification, but so most people know that are listening, simple carbs are things that the body pretty much can readily use as energy. And there are things like sucrose, fructose, pretty common ones. There's also lactose, which is the only sugar that comes from animals. It comes from milk, right? There's complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are multiple sugars stuck together. They're pretty much like oligosaccharides, which means like a few stuck together, and then there's polysaccharides, which are like really large sugar molecules. Pretty much complex carbohydrates are a lot more slower to burn compared to the simple carbohydrates, and they last a lot longer. A lot of things like beta glucans found in not magic mushrooms, whoops, and medicinal mushrooms, they are magical, but have properties like of giving energy and also burning very slowly, and it's kind of been used as treatments for even some blood sugar imbalances. Fructose is like the sugar from fruit, and that's a simple carb, and another complex carb is like starch, which is like potatoes and things like that. Traditional diets typically are very high in starch, which is cool, and probably one of the reasons why a lot of them get addicted to sugars, because starch is a sugar, but it's not a simple sugar. So that's why you see a lot of aboriginals and things like that have diabetes. Okay, I feel like I was just talking for a long time. So did I miss something, Pip? Is there something important that I kind of overlooked so far if we're going to begin talking about blood sugar?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you're kind of covering all the bases. Yeah, I mean, it might be good to go into like how your brain functions on, you need to have glucose going up to your brain and things like that. And then the stress response that happens when you don't have enough, even your blood sugar's not stable, like that.
Yeah, like cortisol and increasing your need for sugar and stuff like that, or
Yeah, or like when your blood sugar drops, that your body goes into in order to try and get enough glucose up to your brain, because you never want your brain to lack glucose, that your body overproduces adrenaline and cortisol.
yeah. That's one of the major reasons why glycogen is really important, because it's actually like stored in the liver and the skeletal muscle, but it's also stored in the liver or in the brain itself, just because it's not always efficient to get from one point A to point B for the brain, because the brain needs to be always having a steady presence of glucose. Actually, is what it is. It's a sugar, but it's glucose.
What's glucose again?
Glucose is a simple sugar. It's like one of the main sugars. It's found in a lot of different.
It's just because you said lactose is from animals and fructose is from fruit. So glucose is from. I'm trying to follow here. Okay, it's a lecture.
Glucose is found usually a lot of times with fructose, but not all the time.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Well, it's often found with fructose, but not all the time. Glucose itself is pretty much the brain's favorite nutrient, if I'd say that.
So what happens to people like me that followed a ketogenic diet?
You basically depend. Pip is giggling.
I haven't listened to podcasts since I got out of the ketogenic scene, so I know what they say. So now I'm like trying to retrain myself with what the actual information is.
They basically talk about when you eat a high protein diet, your liver does a process called gluconeogenesis, where it creates sugars out of proteins. So a lot of paleo or keto usually depend on a cheat day, or they eat a lot of protein for the conversion that the body does. I talked a bit about this on the Facebook group, where the adrenal glands really, when they're burnt out, they don't really do that conversion too well.
So that's what I did.
Yeah, that's why I recommended, even though you're eating meat.
That's why maple syrup was so good.
Yeah, even though you're eating meat and you're eating fat, your glycogen stores, in my opinion, were probably very low, and you were suffering with a little bit of thyroid, maybe a hypothyroid condition, because you didn't have the glycogen stores to produce thyroid hormone. So for the keto people that are pretty much depending on protein conversion, there's simpler ways, and simple sugars are a way to do that. It doesn't have to be difficult. But sugars are so integral to the human being that basically our Our genome is actually dependent on it. So it's like ribonucleic acid, RNA, is the ribose is a sugar molecule. So it's literally in our DNA that we need sugar. So for those that are keto only, it's a little against what you really want to do.
What about for fast oxidizers?
Fast oxidizers?
Do they still have the gluto thingy problem?
Oh,
I think most people do.
Okay.
I think most people do, but the thing is that you can if you have a healthy body, you can definitely last on a diet that's like either keto or paleo for much longer than somebody who's dealing with adrenal fatigue because you're not converting so well. So I think the body's designed to be able to live under whatever conditions. We would have, lived in situations where we couldn't get, say, strawberries in December, and so we would have basically had to eat whatever was local to us, and there would have been times where we would have had like a lack of carbohydrates in our diet, probably. So we might have had short periods of time where we weren't eating carbohydrates, but we wouldn't have had years and years and years where we didn't eat one carbohydrate or like had a super low carb diet. So I think what people are doing right now is kind of experimenting in areas that we've never really experimented before, other than, say, people like the Eskimos. But then you have to take into account that when they were eating, the Eskimos who weren't, they didn't really have too much access to carbohydrates, but they did
You
have,
knew it.
so they basically had like access to some berries, but they also did a lot of fermented foods, and they also had access to very fresh foods, which we don't have nowadays.
And
so
they didn't eat fish either, did they?
they
John was telling me.
they didn't eat fish. Well, I think they ate a lot of whale blubber and seals and things like that, but they did everything that they ate would have been fresh. So when they were eating the blood of other animals, they would have been eating, to some degree, the carbohydrates or the blood glucose of other animals in that blood. But that doesn't last very long when you've like cut it up and put it into the frozen section of the meat section, and it sits for so long. So that's how they would have had access to things like vitamin C, but we just don't live in that kind of climate anymore. So when you go long-term low carb, unless you're taking like a ton of supplements to support like vitamin C synthesis and things like that, then you're going to run into issues.
Yeah, I think it's important that a ketogenic diet is really good, but I also think that you should be eating sugars and eating proteins and going through fasting states still. Because if you become dependent on glucose or fructose, any sugar for energy production, what happens is you always get into a hypoglycemic state. And if you're always dependent on proteins or something like that, usually you can still end up in a hypoglycemic state. And if you're on fats, you can still get low blood sugar. So it's kind of doesn't matter which game you're in, you're all kind of got the same issue where diversity is kind of the solution for it.
So what are you saying there, John? Can you clarify that for me a little bit? Because I didn't totally. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but you're saying if you exist solely on these foods rather than eating a broad spectrum of foods, or are you saying that it's good to go through periods where you say, for example, don't eat any carbohydrates? So we're mimicking like what would happen seasonally.
Mimicking like what happens seasonally was pretty much what I'm getting at, where you can eat large amounts of fat, which like in the winter areas, we'd eat that more in the winter time and things like that. And proteins were abundant, but as you got closer and longer into the winter, you'd usually run out. You could probably still find some, but food was more scarce, so we'd go into a more fasting state.
Right.
And in the summer, you would eat probably more carbohydrate, especially fructose from fruit. And fructose is one of the major simple sugars that convert into fat a lot quicker. That's why it's been correlated with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because that sugar, fructose, it's got like a different pathway compared to glucose. It's more easily turned into fat. That's why you see bigger Hawaiians.
Okay.
Yeah, so I personally think diversity of all of the food groups, the macronutrients, the carbs, the proteins, and the fats need to kind of go through cycles.
Right.
And maybe even a daily kind of rotation where you can do carbs. I prefer to do carbs in the morning and, proteins, in the midday. And then I do, a lot of starches at nighttime personally. But I think doing a rotation throughout the day and throughout the season, throughout the year is really kind of the golden ticket. That's what I think.
Right, because the thing is I think a lot of people don't realize that actually carbs lower cortisol, which doesn't necessarily mean that if you've got low cortisol, you shouldn't eat carbohydrates. But if you have a high cortisol state, and quite often when you do things like keto or paleo, that initial kind of high that people get, and they say, "Oh, so good doing keto, it's amazing." I think a lot of people don't actually realize that that's your body running on stress hormones the whole time because adrenaline feels really good, which is one of the reasons why people become adrenaline.
Yeah, I think it's also with other extreme diets too, like the vegan diet does a similar thing. But you just don't know. That's why it's so good to have HTMA, because then you can actually see if you're good or not without just thinking that you feel that way.
Yeah, so John, maybe you want to go over what to look for on a HTMA to like see where your blood sugar is and how you're metabolizing sugars and what you need to do in order to address those issues. And maybe like let's talk about some of the nutrients involved in regulating blood sugar.
So pretty much calcium magnesium ratio is like the major ratio that we usually look at. Calcium is important because it's necessary for the release of insulin from the pancreas. And the pancreas is also what creates insulin, which I talked about earlier. The magnesium aspect of the calcium magnesium ratio, magnesium inhibits the secretion of insulin, so it's like the on off switch. So when you have a calcium magnesium ratio, that's pretty much, well, the ideal is 6.6, but if you go, it's different if you're in trace elements, I'm aware. I go by Dr. Eck, and that's what I do. So,
There's only like 7, so don't worry about it. We're not going to cut hairs over like 34 points or whatever.
oh, you're just under. Too bad. You cannot ride the roller coaster. Yeah. Now, but when you have a high hair test, which I personally go by, like I'll go 6.6 is ideal, and I always say like ideal is not really normal. What I mean by that is most people aren't ideal. Sometimes it does come up on a single ratio, but the odds of actually having a hair test that comes back as everyone, all the ratios are like ideal. Hasn't happened to me yet. It's the lottery, in my opinion, on the hair test if you get that. But if you have a ratio between 4.5 and 8.5, to me that's like a pretty good ratio. You can have a little bit of imbalance, but as soon as you start to step outside that realm, like it's really common, for example, to see blood sugar ratio, the calcium magnesium ratio as being upwards of 12. You can have it even all the way up to like 40 or 50, and I've seen that.
I've had mine up at 60 at one point.
Yeah, it's common, right?
Yeah.
It's a good thing you didn't have a shoe that was that far away from your ideal shoe size, huh? Trying to walk around in like clown shoes. But that's the importance of the ratio. You need to have a shoe that fits and not, a shoe that's like a clown shoe.
Exactly. What?
That analogy just like goes down so well, John, I have to say.
Yeah.
That makes sense to you.
It's a great analogy right now.
All right, cool. So the calcium magnesium ratio is the major one. The other thing with the calcium magnesium ratio is it has a lot to do with your external lifestyle. So it's not always about what you're doing or how you're feeling or, your personal blood sugar intake. The calcium magnesium ratio can be impacted by external stressors. I personally think that if your environment is very bitter, For example, that you really have a tendency to want more sweetness inside of your body to make up for the imbalance in the outer realm. That could be like an emotional aspect of, blood sugar imbalances. But the calcium magnesium ratio is important. There's like a lot of. Can hear you sweeping or something, Michelle.
I'm sorry. I've just
Okay.
cut my hair for my hair test, and I'm just like getting the hair off the floor. Wow, that's like really sensitive, then, isn't it?
Sorry. So calcium is really important. Magnesium is really important, especially for that ratio itself. The calcium magnesium ratio, when it's like very high, can also indicate like a magnesium deficiency. And magnesium is really important for those with diabetics, and it's pretty much used also for like starting to be used at least for therapy for diabetics, which is pretty cool. I'm in the camp where like just one mineral is not going to solve their problem, but that's how modern medicine works, right? They're looking for the magic bullet, and every time they try a single substance and it doesn't work, they down talk it. So another one that's really important for blood sugar imbalances is chromium, and that's probably my favorite one when it comes to blood sugar imbalances. Chromium, basically, if you imagine your front door as being the cell wall, the surface of the cell, chromium is basically what pushes the doorbell so that insulin can come inside and drop off the groceries. So chromium is really important for allowing sugar into the cell, and it's, in my opinion, it's pretty well essential. There's lots of research just to back chromium up itself. The other important one is vanadium, which to me they're like good friends, because vanadium increases the potency of insulin. So when you're trying to balance your blood sugar, you pretty much want to correct your insulin pathway. Manganese is super important, mostly because it activates a lot of enzymes, but it's also good for insulin. Again, the insulin's like the talk of, as far as what I see, because it's a hormone, it gets things done. But manganese is also really good for the thyroid, and it's like essential for T4 to T3. So because calcium is really important and potassium is very important for blood sugar, you kind of want to consider also the calcium to potassium ratio, and that if any one mineral ratio you see that's out of balance, it's usually the calcium potassium ratio, at least from what I see. So that's what I was getting back earlier when I was talking with Aaron with the low glycogen stores, and how I felt like she was in like a hypothyroid state because she wasn't properly able to produce glucose out of glycogen because she was always constantly working. I just intuitively, at the time I didn't have a hair test, but I know from my background of fitness, of when you're excessive labor work or you're moving around, 10 hours a day, sweating and things like that, that you require glucose. I didn't know at the time that it was really good for thyroid health, and that you don't have adequate glycogen, then you can't produce thyroid hormone. So that was just.
What's the difference between glucogen and glycogen?
Glucogen?
Well, I don't know.
Great.
She's just asked me all these questions. I didn't even consider those two. I'd accidentally asked the question.
You said it.
Yeah. I think glucogen's a hormone. I could be wrong. But glycogen I've kind of already talked about.
This is basically a home conversation where John will give me a lecture and I'll go, I don't know what that word means.
Yeah, well, glycogen, I messed it up because if you listen to the word glucogen, right, it's a generator of glucose, and glycogen is a generator of glucose. So they're the same word. They're synonyms.
Okay.
I messed up because when I was saying, it happens a lot.
Just
also.
clarifying.
Yeah, no, thank you. It happens a lot, especially because I come from America and we call like epinephrine, we call it something else and things like that. So
Got a funny accent, in other words. That's all, Aaron.
It's my funny accent, I'll tell you.
It's alright, I got a funny accent.
Yeah, so really your thyroid health has a lot to do with your blood sugar. Those are like the major minerals. You don't see all of those on the hair test from ARL, but if you get a trace elements hair test, you will see vanadium, which I've mentioned, which to me it's really good. But I don't really see it very high actually on hair tests. Did I miss any minerals, Pippa? I think.
No, you didn't miss any minerals. We didn't really speak about vitamins though.
Ooh, vitamins. Do you have any in mind? I got a couple.
Well, just like the role of like B vitamins in digesting carbohydrates. So if you're low in certain B vitamins like B1, I think it's B1, B2, B6. I think even biotin has a role in glucose metabolism as well.
Yeah.
If you're low in B vitamins, then you're going to have issues with digesting sugars properly, and that's obviously going to then have a knock-on effect to your blood glucose.
Absolutely.
Michelle just said that she has to go because she didn't realise the call was going to be so long.
Yeah.
No problem. Nice coming, Michelle.
You can listen to the rest of the recording.
Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, sorry, I just thought it'd be like an hour or something, but I've got to get ready to go out now. So,
No, it's very thorough.
yeah, so I'll listen to the recording. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot then. Bye.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.
I don't know how to end the call, but here we go. Oh.
I can't kick you out. Okay. Yeah, so the B vitamins are very important, like you're saying. They're also really important for neuropathies, which when some people have like numbness and things like that, which is a really common symptom for diabetes. So the B vitamins, like you said, I always personally just consider the B complex because I don't like to supplement just a single B vitamin. I do on occasion do a B12 because
I do like B12.
Aaron likes B12. So I do on occasion do the isolated B12, but usually I always just consider B vitamins as a whole. Step back to us, Pippa.
Blood sugar and blood pressure.
Blood sugar and blood pressure.
Are they related? Because I have low blood pressure and I think I also have blood pressure.
Low blood pressure usually correlated with adrenal symptoms.
So they are.
And your adrenals pretty much your adrenals use glucocorticoids, which are hormones that are based off of sugar again. So there is a correlation there. You asked about low blood pressure, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, not to do with sugar, but it is because adrenals.
Well, the adrenal glands are dependent on sugar because you need them to create hormones.
So would it go the same way with high blood sugar and high blood pressure?
Yeah, it does tend to run like that a lot. That's what I notice a lot with my clients is that the ones that tend to have more the low blood sugar. But the thing is low blood sugar, people who have high blood sugar can be predisposed to having low blood sugar as well, which is one of the reasons why they're basically not getting sugar into the cell, right? So their blood sugar may look high, but that doesn't mean they don't have low blood sugar drops throughout the course of the day, which is how you can go into a diabetic coma because basically the blood sugar is not getting into the cell at that point.
Absolutely, and I agree how you brought I like how you brought that back up because it's really easy to overlook when you talk about blood sugar and how blood sugar itself isn't actually what we're trying to nourish. We don't really the level of blood sugar is important, but what's more important is that the cell can adequately use that sugar so that it can create energy, because if you can't create energy with that sugar, or if it's not getting into the cell, that's how you end up with hyperglycemia, right? Or even hypoglycemia persistently, which is less of a problem.
So it works the same way like minerals. So when, how John explains to me minerals and how you can look like you've got them in the blood, but if you're excreting them in the hair and you're not excreting them, it's the same. So sugar and minerals sort of work the same way in the hair test. Yeah.
Well, the blood always has to maintain.
Sorry, it's really hard for me to comment because whenever I comment, I have to echo it myself, so it's very difficult to speak.
She's got feedback when she talks, so she hears herself delayed.
Right, yeah, that's really annoying. I hate doing consults with people.
So I lose my concentration when I'm trying to speak.
No worries.
The one thing I'll comment is I wouldn't say they're exactly the same, like minerals, but I'd say they're similar in the respect that the blood is always being maintained at a certain range of whether it's minerals or blood sugar, and you can have elevated levels of calcium, which usually...
So it's like bioavailable sugar?
Yeah, kind of, I guess.
Yeah, it's a bit like, the idea of copper toxicity, right? That you have.
That's what I was thinking about.
You have loads of sugar floating around in your bloodstream, but you don't, because you're eating a ton of carbohydrates, but your body isn't using it properly. And, back in the day when, like years and years ago, but I think it was back in the early, like, 1900s, that there was a couple of scientists around at that point that understood that actually diabetes is a sugar wasting syndrome. So the body isn't using sugar properly, and so the way that they would treat diabetes would be to get people to eat huge amounts of sugar, because it's not so much that you're eating too much sugar, and that's one of the reasons why you're peeing or you have a lot of sugar in your urine or in your blood. It's that your body's not utilizing it properly, and so the way that they were treating it was actually to give people a lot of sugar, and they had great success with that until then insulin was kind of like created, and then that was all kind of swept under the carpet, and like all of those experiments were kind of forgotten. But I think
I agree with you when you said that. It's like a sugar wasting, but it's not actually. It's like bioavailable sugar, like you're saying. Like they have it just like the copper, but they're not utilizing it properly.
Right, and
so to utilize it properly, you need to have a good calcium-magnesium ratio.
That's right. That's one of the elements. So again, I seem to remember that Ray Peat, who's the sugar, the king of sugar,
The sugar pimp.
Yeah, John's just gone onto him.
Right.
So I've been hearing a lot about sugar lately.
Yeah, so Ray Peat's really into sugar and blood sugar and regulation in relationship to like thyroid hormone, and he is pretty amazing. I like some of his stuff. I don't agree with all of it, but his father apparently was I can't remember if he was type 1 diabetic or type 2 diabetic. I'm not totally sure, but he healed him through making him drink large quantities of nutritional yeast mixed into water. So that's how it works.
So how does nutritional yeast work with mineral balancing?
So nutritional yeast is really high in B vitamins, and if you read any books by a woman called Adele Davis, she's a really big fan of yeast because it's got a ton of B vitamins, and then it's got a ton of chromium in it.
Yeah, I was about to comment that one, but absolutely. And it's actually, as far as I know, modern day nutritional yeast, they've been taking out some of the niacin so that you don't get the niacin flush that you used to get, and then they sell that as a secondary vitamin now,
right?
Because that's how you make a buck, right?
Right.
So it's not always the same as those old books. But...
Right. Well, you can. So I think most of the nutritional yeast these days has synthetic vitamins added to it, B vitamins added to it, but you can there's like Blue Bonnet, which is a company I think out of the US, and they make nutritional yeast in the old-fashioned way. And it's made from sugar beets, and it's all natural, and so it has a really high. If you look on the back of the what's it called? I think it's like 2 tablespoons is your RDA for all of your B vitamins.
That's really cool. I knew Blue Bonnet. I didn't know.
So if we took that, would that affect our calcium magnesium ratio?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you consider that calcium magnesium ratio was only your blood sugar ratio, sure. But I like to think
affect the blood sugar ratio?
I think it would, personally.
Yeah, because it's
right.
To start off with, you have enough B6 on board to use calcium and magnesium. That's just one of the B vitamins. So that it's like that thing of like everything's interrelated. So you have to have the B vitamins in order to use your minerals, and the other way around.
Yeah, and the one thing is like usually the calcium magnesium ratio is really elevated with the sloxidizer, and just part of the metabolic type kind of nutrients that the sloxidizer is really good with is B vitamins. But yeah, as far as balancing the calcium magnesium ratio with brewer's yeast, I don't know if that works like that personally. It'd be cool if it does.
I don't know. I'm just trying to tie it together a bit.
Right. I think you could do it by using food, but I think you'd probably have to do. I mean, she was talking about doing something like she says start off slowly because with yeast you can get gas, right? Because all of your good bacteria will eat the yeast up. So basically, she said start off with like half a teaspoon, and you can go up to as high as half a cup of yeast a day. So
Wow,
she has a drink in her thingy. It's called a pep up, and it's like it's really interesting because I actually understand a little bit about where Ray Peat got some of his ideas for, because he suggests drinking milk and orange juice combined, right? Because he's trying to get yeah, it sounds pretty gross. So her drink was like orange juice, milk, and then like half a cup of yeast.
Isn't that what you drink when you need to throw up?
I don't know. That was her.
Citrus and milk?
That was her drink for people that were like really like stressed out, because she recognized that like people who were under a lot of stress had a much higher need for B vitamins. So the other thing that she also suggests is that people eat liver for breakfast every morning.
Every morning.
Yeah, every morning. Liver.
It's probably good for you.
How much is she
I'm not going to
recommending
do
though?
it, but it's probably good for you.
She's talking like a quarter of a pound of liver for breakfast in the mornings.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of
How much
copper.
is that in kilos?
I don't think you're going to be doing that ongoing forever, but that's like if you're in a really exhausted state and you need to replenish like B vitamins and all, like, obviously copper and iron and all those types of things. So people that are in states of exhaustion, she suggests using liver as like a superfood.
Well, I've been on desiccated grass-fed beef liver capsules.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
The quantity though.
I can take quantity.
Yeah.
The capsules.
She talks about something like 25 to 40. It's just quite fascinating. I really do suggest that you read some of her work. It's quite fascinating, like the knowledge.
Give it to John, he'll read it.
It's from like the 1960s. I mean, some of it's like a little bit outdated, and you're a bit like, not sure about that nowadays. But for sure, she's really on point with a lot of stuff in there. I was like, wow. Yeah, she talks about, I think, like consuming something like 25 beef liver capsules in one go.
Wow, I used to get heartburn just eating like 2 of them. This is years ago. I really couldn't tolerate them too well personally. I did well in the beginning. You did okay?
Yeah, I didn't notice. That was just one of the supplements I was taking at the time when I was on keto.
Right, John. Do you guys actually eat liver?
John has eaten liver, yes. We got it a couple of weeks ago, and he thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
I really liked it. Yeah.
Did not eat it.
You have to cook it with bacon.
No, he doesn't eat bacon. He soaked it in milk.
I don't eat pork, so
I don't eat pork. Okay.
that's just my dogma that I don't eat pork.
Okay. Is that because of a religious belief, or is that because you think it's a dirty animal and you're kind of believing in the RBTI thing that pork is actually toxic for the body?
What I'm more concerned about with pork is actually about parasites.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
That's really the major concern I have with that pork.
Yeah.
But nowadays you can say that about any animal, right? So maybe it's just dietary arbitrary. I don't know. I just don't eat it.
Okay.
Can we talk about candida and sugar?
Sure.
Does that fall within the...
Yeah, it's in blood sugar imbalances. I guess some people get candida.
Because, I mean, you're fighting a blood sugar imbalance, but you're also kind of fighting the candida overgrowth.
Right, but the thing is, I think what most people don't realize is that candida grows naturally in your gut anyway.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
an overgrowth of candida that causes an issue, and quite often when people starve their candida, what actually happens is the candida burrows down through the lining of your gut into your bloodstream looking for sugar because it knows that there's blood sugar in your veins. So
Ooh.
so that can actually cause more of an issue in like gut permeability issues when you go onto a low carb diet, which is pretty much what's diet based for having a candida infection, which is just like I would slap people on the forehead sometimes with that because I know I did that myself. I did the whole low sugar thing, and then then you eat an ounce of sugar, you go, I want to eat this till it comes out of my ears, so type thing. So you kind of get this idea that you're feeding your candida but you're basically your body needs to have sugar, and so I think that that's a misnomer. It's like I think you're chasing after like it's like it's a phantom. You're chasing a phantom when you think that if you cut sugar out of your diet, you're going to kill off candida.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
No, John taught me not to think of candida as trying to kill them, so
Right.
because we do have an overgrowth, and if we just eat properly, then they'll just not. But I don't know. I've got it. I feel it in my toes. I know it's there. It's camping, and I've got it in the back of my neck. I get itchy there, but I don't.
The thing with candida is, at least from what I know, is you'll never truly, if you try to go on a candida cleanse or something like that, because in the past you ate a lot of sugar and you think that you have a candida imbalance, usually you will not get rid of the candida imbalance. I don't want to get rid of it anyway, like all of it, because you need it. But you won't get rid of it completely until you balance your minerals, because mercury and copper and I think those are the two major ones, really promote candida overgrowths. And it kind of ties back in with the pancreas itself, because you mentioned like type 1 diabetes earlier with Ray Pete's dad. I don't know which diabetes it was that he had, but type 1 diabetes is not an immune issue. And what happens a lot is the body, they say, is attacking itself because, the body's stupid.
Sorry, excuse me. That was my father calling me on Skype. I need to get rid of that.
It always happens.
No, shucks.
Well, if he phones once, that usually means that he's going to have to try 20 times, even though hold on, Skype. Let's get rid of it. Skype. Okay, there we go. That's the way to deal with that.
Oh, bless him.
So what you're saying is you don't think it's actually the candida craving the sugar, it's just your body still craving the sugar because you still need it.
Yes.
You do still need it.
I can follow that.
The thing with the like type 1 diabetes to just comment on is that like nowadays they talk about a lot of environmental influences for it, and because they say the body's stupid, it attacks itself and destroys major organs, right? Which I personally don't believe. I think there's always a reason for that. And for the pancreas, for example, which the beta cells are what produces insulin, what's common is that it can you can get like viruses and bacterial infections and things like that in organs, which people don't really talk about. And I think if you're really going to kind of talk about candida or something, you kind of got to talk about the heavy metal aspect, which is how like arsenic and cadmium and mercury can all kind of put you into a hypoglycemic state, and also how copper is kind of used as a molecule to create the biofilm that the candida use. So to me personally, like even if you go on a cleanse and you're drinking powdered argo all the time and you're zero sugar and you're drinking turpentine or whatever you want to do, right, to each their own, but I think it will, like, it doesn't matter what you do, because the candida being overgrown is trying to find a balance. And when your biology is out of balance, that gives them an opportunity to grow. And it's not necessarily the candida's problem, right? That it's there. There's an environment that allows it to be there.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents on that. And it kind of correlates with blood sugar imbalances, because generally they connect like candida and inflammation is kind of like a major thing. But like diabetes, like when Pip asked about vitamins, I said, yay, vitamins. But in my head, I was kind of thinking like almost every vitamin is good for them because vitamins essentially are really good at lowering inflammation. So like any vitamin, like vitamin C or vitamin E or even B vitamins, which, can help with inflammation when you're really low in them, or, they can help with neuropathies, which help blood circulate, which still helps, right? Altering the environment so that it helps the blood sugar imbalance. But changing your diet, even if you're eating high sugar diet, you can also eat other foods that don't allow candida to grow, but they'll still grow. Like, I guess that's what I'm trying to get. The environment is basically what allows them to be there.
John, can we talk a little bit about sorry, I didn't like slightly change the subject. Can we talk a little bit about stress and the relationship of stress on blood sugar and things like that, and how stress can be like a major driver for people having blood sugar issues and things like that?
I practically live off sugar when I'm stressed. That's all I eat.
I do think that you need sugar when you're under stress, right? For the reasons why you said, when carbohydrates lower cortisol,
Yeah.
and cortisol is the stress hormone. Also, we've mentioned about glycogen and how you need sugar for glycogen production so you can maintain your thyroid. And the stress hormones are dependent on glucose again for glucocorticoids. So I do think it's critical, but when it comes to the diabetes, I feel like we talk about it a lot, but the nervous system, right, is really important.
Right.
And basically, the vagus nerve is kind of one of the underlying aspects that I feel always gets overlooked when it comes to blood sugar imbalances or even diabetes, because chronic inflammation, from whether you're pushing yourself or you have biochemical imbalances which creates inflammation, or your cells aren't properly cleansing. So you may be, like you say, you clear out candida, but then you have a bunch of dead candida in your blood, right? That's a stressor still. That's an endogenous toxin. To me, all of that stuff activates the nervous system, and the vagus nerve is pretty much what suppresses inflammation when it can, because it's like the brain kind of, how would I say, the brain kind of gets the information through the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve also brings information from the brain back down to help address the stress in the actual location. Are you talking about stress from external sources or internal?
No, I'm thinking more like external stressors.
Okay.
As within, so without. So it's kind of both.
Right.
Well, yeah, it'll still affect the vagus nerve.
I mean, like in the sense of like, if you think about it, right? So if somebody goes through a huge amount of stress, there's usually two things that people do. They either do one of two extreme things. They either lose their appetite, right, or they binge.
I find that when I get stressed, I forget how to eat properly. And what I do is I end up reverting back to whatever program I had as either a child or a teenager or whatever. And those are the foods that I crave and that I can make. And a lot of the new information is a lot of like the nutritional balancing stuff. I just forget. I completely forget how to make anything, and I just revert back to eating all those carbs and really carby, sugary meals.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've just noticed that for over the years from when I've been observing my own diet.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like that. If you look at that kind of cliche of like a girl splitting up with her boyfriend and sitting in bed with a big tub of ice cream, like, with her box of tissues crying her eyes out.
I go on the repeat diet.
When they get stressed.
Yeah. Well,
unless it's just the body craving it too.
I think there's always a biological uniqueness that we have. Some instances I'll fast when I need to, if I don't, especially if I'm restricted on time or something. But I'll also at least personally, when I really need to think properly and clearly, I tend to eat food. I prefer starch when I'm kind of like that personally, and salt. That's what I do. I think it's an individual thing, really, when you have an external stress, because in one aspect, there's like the comfort food, right? Or what you revert back to in a state when you felt comfortable, right? And the other one is like sometimes you kind of go for cravings that you need biologically that you don't necessarily know that you need. Like some
Right.
people crave,
Right.
chocolate because they need the magnesium.
Yeah, I think I'm just kind of trying to like, I don't know, demonstrate in some way that like, that basically when you get a sugar craving, it's not like, there's like that whole anti-sugar kind of like vibe out there, like sugar's the worst thing in the world and it'll kill you and all of that type of thing. And actually, that sugar can be really constructive sometimes, like especially when you're in a stress response. That it can actually be helpful rather than harmful. Of course, you don't necessarily want to sit there and eat like 10 tubs of Haagen-Dazs like 3 months straight.
Yeah, so it's not the sugar that we should be fearing, it's more the artificial chemicals that they've put with it.
Right. Yeah, to some degree. I mean, I don't think I would. It's funny because people talk about sugar addiction, but I've never met anybody who's just sat there and got like a white sugar and like just sat there and shoveled white sugar into their mouths. Usually
No.
I've seen people that have soft drink addiction,
Right.
and to me that's kind of interested me personally. It makes my nose all puffy. I can't really drink it. It pops in my mouth, right? But what I always found that when they always relate back to it, it's almost like I'm unsure if they need it because they're usually in a stressed out state all the time and they don't know that, or just general laziness. That's kind of one thing I think, at least, because at the end of the day, you can't live off of sugar,
Right.
right? Like, you need fiber, and if you're following the repeat diet, you're probably lacking fiber.
Right.
But if you're following even the SAD diet, you're probably lacking fiber, right? Well, if you're eating white bread, you're still getting a little bit, but nothing compared to even if you're eating, whole grains or something like that. So at the end of the day, I don't think that you can really live on the addiction.
Right.
Can I ask how blood sugar is different in fast oxidizers and slow oxidizers?
Do you have any comment, Pippa?
Is it?
I don't know if I have any comment. I think when you probably use, I think slow oxidizers, you'll probably tend towards more hypoglycemia and fast oxidizers maybe hyper, but that's just my thoughts about it. Like I can't say
So they haven't correlated it per se?
I can't say I've really super noticed a difference. Quite often people that are fast oxidizers, like they'll still have blood sugar issues. And I never think of like, I always think of like them as the same thing, that there's an issue in the body that's going on that stops you from using sugars properly. It's just like one extreme or the other. Hypo, I think generally most people are hypo and then they go, well, after a long period of time, they go hyper. Those are my about it, but I don't know if that's true or not.
I agree. I think it's easy to think right off the bat, like, oh, you're slow oxidizer, so you're probably hypo, and you're fast oxidizer, you're probably hyper. But when you really think about it, it doesn't really matter, like you're saying, like, because usually it's like saying, oh, like you need to fix your thyroid, but usually your thyroid doesn't go out until your adrenal glands do and your liver, right? So it doesn't really matter if you're fast or slow. You can still kind of even approach blood sugar in the sense that it's a biochemical imbalance. There's still oxidative damage happening. A fast oxidizer, it's happening a lot faster. They might require more sugar in this, but at the same kind of sense, it's not necessarily true. They might require fats. And I think that's why nowadays we see like a lot of diabetics that try the ketogenic diet. I bring up ketogenic because it's the one that brings out ketones. You're not running on sugar anymore, right?
Right.
So the fast oxidizer generally can tolerate fats more, and the slow oxidizer can tolerate carbohydrates more. Wilson says protein, but he tainted Dr. Watson's work. It's actually carbohydrate. So that's the important, you have the thyroid imbalance and hypoadrenia. You need carbs. When you're a fast oxidizer, you generally have an overactive adrenal gland, but you guys are still responding to stress similarly, but your blood sugar imbalance can pretty much usually go hypo and then it goes into hyper, like Pip is saying. So I don't think it's as clear cut, even though some metabolic people try to go yin and yang of it, right? One's one side, the other's the other side. I don't think it's as clear cut as that.
Right, and I don't think people actually even know is probably the answer to the question, Erin, to some degree.
Well, that's just good to know, because I was making that assumption based on the keto thing, so it's good to know that it's just not that clear cut.
Yeah, I mean, I think within the health world that there's still a lot of like gray areas, even when it comes down to like thyroid function and like, most doctors don't know how to from regular lab results, most doctors will not diagnose a thyroid condition until you're like well in an advanced state of thyroid dysbiosis, right? Which is usually somewhere between 2 and 10 years if you've been dealing with the problem, that then your TSH will go high. You could have been having like Hashimoto's or thyroid symptoms for 10 years prior to that, going to the doctor with all the symptoms of hypothyroidism, but because the TSH doesn't show high in the reference range, then they'll just say there's nothing wrong with you. And I kind of get the sense that that's the same with blood sugar and things like that. We're only really starting to get to grips now with how the body works. And I think that like the next 20 or 30 years, like a lot of the ideas that we have now will be blown out of the water. So again, kind of going back to that adrenal side of things, I think a lot of practitioners think of like adrenals as being like super important, but now like they're starting to realize that maybe it's more to do with mitochondrial function. So,
Or how about the whole body being important?
Right. Right. Exactly. Right. So, if you're not producing energy at a cellular level, then of course your adrenals and your thyroid aren't going to work properly.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And like in the last, I think 2 calls ago, we talked about like the gastrointestinal disturbances, and I said it's like a spinning wheel when you're working on your gut health, and then you need to work on your liver health, and that affects your adrenal health, which affects your thyroid health, and it's like that affects your gallbladder health, and it goes back to the small intestine. Like they're all connected, and to kind of take them apart and say, oh, it's just this one thing,
right?
It doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
And I find myself sometimes I struggle because a lot of my philosophy is very holistic and things like that, but I still find that sometimes I get clouded in the mainstream way of how they see things, right?
Yeah. Reductionist thinking.
Yeah, and deterministic.
Right.
So you're going to go on to your questions, or did you want?
I was just going to say there's a couple of different herbs that are really good for hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. So metformin, which a lot of people know about, right? That's like the blood sugar drug that people take. Some longevity enthusiasts take that to prolong their life. But anyway, that metformin is actually derived from a herb, and that herb is Siberian ginseng. And not many people really know that, but so Siberian ginseng, if you're in the hippie kind of realm, you might want to try that.
I didn't know that, John.
Yeah, cool. So
fascinating. I really didn't know that.
Yeah, so Siberian ginseng is pretty helpful with that. The other one, if you're on the other aspect and you got chronic hypoglycemia, there's most people know this one, that bitter melon is really helpful for that, and it's been documented to be more potent than the drug albutamide, which is a hypoglycemia drug. So that's just an option. It is expensive, but it's very helpful for hypoglycemia. Cucumber is like a sugar-free kind of fruit. That's also very helpful for insulin.
Is that for hyper or hypo or both?
Cucumber?
Yeah.
Cucumber is really good just for activating insulin response. And So it's just helpful for that. It's got a couple different enzymes in there that help with that. Ginkgo biloba, which a lot of people use, like we talked about brain fog today. Ginkgo biloba is also used to increase insulin production. So not everyone, depending which imbalance you have, you might not be producing enough insulin from the pancreatic beta cells. So ginkgo biloba is really good for that. It also helps clear insulin out, so that like with the liver and detoxification. So that's a cool herb that it's not just about your brain, that one. And like there's the culinary ones, which a lot of us cook with. You might even use it, you just don't really notice. Some people that don't have diabetes might not realize it because they just use it in their diet. People that do have diabetes that are living on Coca-Cola or some other things. Not that Coca-Cola causes diabetes, because we've kind of outlined that's not really true, but still. So cinnamon is common for helping blood sugar. Green and black tea, allspice, cloves, nutmeg. So you can pretty much make yourself like a chai tea, right? Mushrooms are really good for your blood levels, and that's a repeat thing as well. The blood with mushrooms. So
Edible mushrooms.
edible mushrooms, yeah.
Edible mushrooms are tonic.
Actual
Yeah,
edible
mushroom.
mushrooms, like the white mushroom, just the basic agaricus.
So not oyster or
No, but I'm sure oysters, shiitake, and ramini and all that would also be beneficial.
Yeah.
Garlic and onion. Sorry?
I think he says that all the mushrooms can be used, but I think that he particularly, kind of gets into these little weird
Cook it for 3 hours.
Yeah, but fungi is sort of an emerging field, and a lot of people just lump mushrooms all together as one thing, and they're really not.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking.
Garlic and onion are really good also. They stimulate insulin production. Same with aloe vera. So depending on really what you need, those are just some herbs that can help. There was a question asked about.
You're cutting out.
Am I cutting out?
No,
Okay, you're back now.
you're back again now. That just cut out.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Okay. Daniel asked, can you talk on the utilization of fructose and the necessity of stored glucose for proper liver function? I've kind of touched on that. Do you have any thoughts, Pippa? I'm probably overlooking something.
No, I think, definitely you need, I think we've covered like the bases in the sense that like, you need B vitamins also to make sure that your liver functions properly. And that, if you have a deficiency in B vitamins, then quite often you won't store glycogen properly. So that's like another add-on for some people. Like it's not just the mineral, definitely the B vitamins play quite an important role in storing glycogen. And generally most healthy human beings store about 8 hours of glycogen, and that's one of the reasons why most of us sleep about 8 hours at night. And if you wake up a lot in the night, so what's the sign? There's different signs that you can tell if you've got a blood sugar imbalance. But one of the main ones is waking up a lot in the night, especially if you get up and go pee. Usually a sign that your blood sugar has dropped during the night. So just a way that you can tell if you're storing glycogen in your liver. I think those are the main things. But if you don't store glycogen in your liver, then your quality of life is just kind of a little bit less than most other human beings is, because you're kind of stuck to your fridge half the day because you have to eat on a regular basis.
Yeah, and you literally depend on each meal, otherwise your mood is all over the place.
Right.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
right.
Erin was like that when we first met.
Well, John can be a little bit like that too.
Yeah.
If I don't feed him.
Right, yeah. I mean, I can do about 4 or 5 hours now between meals for the most part, but there were points where I was like 3 hours, and if I skipped a meal, I would get like, usually I'd start shaking at some point, and then like I'd feel my pulse start pounding in my neck. I'd start sweating really profusely and feeling really anxious and nervous. And I'm pretty sure that was when I was younger. I used to have these like horrible panic attacks, and I'm pretty sure that was just my blood sugar dropping.
Yeah, probably. That sounds a lot like what happened to me back when I'd have sugar problems too.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say about fructose utilization, because that was the other part of the question, was that fructose blocks the stimulation of insulin by glucose. Some foods have both in them, but orange juice, for example, has a lot more fructose. That's why it can shoot your blood sugar crazy high when you're. I was at work years ago, was a lady that used to always have to leave work just for 5 minutes to go get orange juice because her blood sugar was low, and it was like it goes low and you drink something, it shoots it right back up, and you're good for like an hour, 2 hours, and then it goes low, and then you go drink some more orange juice and it shoots right back up. So fructose blocks the stimulation of insulin, so it's not necessarily beneficial if you have blood sugar imbalances. Fructose. I also mentioned earlier with its role in the liver and how fructose is more easily stored as fat, which is probably kind of like a survival mechanism that we probably gained due to the seasons. So you can eat all spring and summer, mostly in the summer, so that you can gain weight for the winter fast. Yeah, and that's pretty much what I got off the top just on fructose with the liver. The other thing would be like a lot of times people with blood sugar imbalances, like in syndrome X or metabolic syndrome, whatever you want to call it, they have very high cholesterol. And that's like a interesting aspect where high cholesterol is not really the devil or whatever you want to call it. It's not the bad guy. But what is the inflammation that comes from whether it's metabolic waste products or chronic micronutrient deficiencies and things like that. Like chromium and manganese, those two alone are pretty good at lowering, cholesterol, for example. But the triglycerides themselves are usually when fructose is stored in the liver, the liver converts them into triglycerides, and that becomes like visceral fat, like the fat that's in our body. So you can have high triglyceride levels, which is like LDL or something like that, and it could just be from fruit, which is interesting.
I have to say, when I did the whole repeat thing, that my cholesterol went up to like 380 US, if I'm thinking US units. So it was like 9.8 or something like that in the UK. I had higher cholesterol than my 75 or 74-year-old mother.
Yeah.
The whole repeat thing. So since
That's really common on the keto diets too.
Right.
Yeah, but that's pretty high in my opinion, what Pippa just said. I see people and their doctors freak out when it's at like 6.9,
Right.
which is like 290 in America or something, which is not that high really.
Right.
It's high, but it's not that high.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and I've like when I changed out of like eating repeat style, it came back down again. So it dropped by nearly 3 points. So it went from like 9.8 or whatever it was here in the UK. So it is now like I think it's like 280 or 270, 280 or something like that. The last test it was like 3 months ago.
So what type of sugars do you recommend to be eating with a nutritional balancing diet? And don't say glucose, like actually say words like maple syrup.
Yeah, I think it depends, well, from my point of view, I think it depends on what you get on well with. I do best with starches. I do some fruit, but I do mainly starches. I don't do so many grains. I don't do so well with grains. But ultimately, I think that the ultimate goal is to get to a point where you can eat all different types of like sugars, like whether it be fruit or, whole food sugars, fruits, whole grains or beans.
Like honey and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if beans really throws off your blood sugar, then I think you got other problems because they shouldn't, right?
So molasses, because Magda mentioned it earlier.
Molasses?
Black
Molasses?
molasses. So,
Yep.
well, they're high in minerals. Black molasses. Ours would be iron.
It's actually, if I remember right, molasses is the byproduct of sugar production.
Yeah.
Personally, I think, blackstrap molasses is cool. I personally like Rapidur sugar because it's just sugar juice dehydrated, so it's got sugar and it's got the molasses in there already. It hasn't been separated, which I consider a whole food sugar because it's not much different than sucking on a sugar cane, except it doesn't have fiber. But there's something really cool with the blackstrap molasses where, at least from what I remember, is the non-organic one is actually more complete than the organic version. I'll probably comment on the call or something on the exact one of that, but I'm quite sure that the organic one, they've taken some sugar out of it, where it's kind of not really just blackstrap molasses like they're selling.
When's the best time of day to eat the specific sugars? Like simple and complex? Because when you're trying to eat like 9 cups of vegetables, you don't want to just put sugar on your vegetable. Well, you could.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't know. I put honey on my, if I make a stir fry, I put sometimes I'll put a spoon
Oh, yeah, that's the best.
of honey in my stir fry. So I mean, I'm not going to put I wouldn't put a dessert spoon of white sugar in there, but I definitely put like a teaspoon of honey or something in it to give it flavor. So I think the main thing John mentioned earlier on. Sorry, John, I just jumped in.
No, it's okay.
There, but I think you mentioned earlier on eating a lot of carbohydrates at night because that's the time that you want your cortisol to be lowest. Carbohydrates at night, lots of carbohydrates at night will help you to store more glycogen to get you through the night to sleep better.
I do agree with that, and where you'd have like a sweet snack, like when we were in Bulletproof, we talked about having honey at nighttime.
Yeah, I was going to say we used to have a teaspoon of honey before bed, and that was to help with the blood sugar while you slept.
That's it, exactly. So I still stand by that. I think if you're going to eat foods, it's probably a good idea to eat starches at nighttime with lots of butter, because starch are already very slow burning, but then you want to have a fat with it to kind of help slow it even more. That's kind of the way I do it. I know like Aaron, for example, can't eat butter like I can. I have like a Canada gene or something where I can just eat.
No, I think it's just me. I just don't do good with fats. Like I never did. That was how I knew keto was wrong, because they kept telling me that eventually I'll be able to handle it, and I never could. I just get nauseous. Even with my morning tonic and it's got butter in it, I just still drink it really slowly. And even now, like I struggle to eat the avocados that I used to. So I really need to have a carb to eat fats now. I just can't. I get nauseous.
Yeah, but if you're on the Wilson program, first I'll commend you for doing that. But second, there's not much sugars that you're really allowed because Wilson says they're far too yin. So.
Good thing I'm a woman. I am already far too yin. I'm meant to be.
Erin said she's already far too yin. She's meant to be. She's a woman.
And remember, fruit's toxic as well. It has poisonous potassium.
It's much too yin.
Yes, toxic potassium.
But then again, the other day he didn't like greens either, so I don't know.
Yeah, he's not fond of green vegetables like leaves.
Wilson isn't.
Yeah.
No, he took it off.
That was the line for me personally when he said no. Was it kale? I don't know.
I actually did try to make John a cookbook at one point, and I went through his website, but he just can't agree on what he actually believes. So it's kind of impossible.
He kept changing it. So, and then all of a sudden he's like, my helpers told us we need rutabaga with each meal,
and
so
yeah, the yin yang thing.
So why was it all green leafy vegetables, or was it just kale because people eat loads of kale?
No, I think it was leafy vegetables in general.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he took them all out. And his reasoning was thallium at the time. I'm not sure if that's changed, but thallium is the reason. It took me forever to like kale, so by the time I heard that, I was over it. I'm like really finally just started to eat some green because I was a raw foodist for such a long time. We ate kale like it was going out of style, and then I stopped eating it because that's all I ate pretty much with other stuff. But then I finally started to be able to become okay with eating it again, and yeah, I just that was the line for me. No green leafies. But yeah.
No, that's just ridiculous. I mean, I just find some of his I know I don't know I know that a lot of people are in the group are into.
Oh, where'd you go, Pippa? You've gone muffled. Did you drop it?
What's that? My microphone?
Yep.
Is it gone muffled? Oh, hold on. Is that better?
Yep.
I
That's
was,
good.
I was going to say, I don't want to get into Wilson bashing here, but like, you know, he just has
Yeah,
No,
we
no,
don't
no.
like to either.
I just find that there's some really ridiculous ideas in the nutritional, like his ideas about nutrition, just like, you know, it's all right for people to eat like deep fried in canola oil corn chips, but they can't eat like green leafy vegetables. Like, no.
Yeah, I did comment about that the other day. Blue corn's like the best thing ever, but I question the science on that.
Yeah.
I already asked John, I went, how is that true?
It locks in nutrients. I don't really agree with that personally. I think
We don't really do oils, so
Yeah.
well,
I don't do fried food like really of any description. So
right. I would comment though on the Wilson, sugar imbalance aspect where they don't have a lot of sugar, and if they are having hypoglycemia and things like that,
yeah.
they might want to lower their PUFA intake. It's just one of my
and PUFA is.
PUFA is a polyunsaturated fatty acid, Aaron.
You need to remind people. Didn't say what a PUFA was.
Well, PUFA, it's commonly,
I didn't know when I first asked you what it was.
That's okay. Clarity's best. Yeah, the PUFAs, I've always correlated them before I even come across some of Ray Peat's work with inflammation and oxidized fats, which is lipofuscin and stuff like that. But the inflammation at the end of the day, to me, really is like gas on the fire for the sugar imbalance. So sardines and things like that, I'm not too fond of personally. I think some of Wilson's diet is a little bit in training the body to be in a hypothyroid state, like oily fish, omega-3s, large amounts of cruciferous vegetables, lots of meat protein twice a day. Not everyone can do that stuff, right?
I can't.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I just remember when I did Wilson's program that I definitely binged on carbs when I got carbs. Like when I got a bag of corn chips, I'd eat the whole fucking thing in one sitting because I was so carbohydrate deprived.
It's so easy to do with those bags of corn chip, but ever since we got the really good supplier who makes them straight from the tortillas, I find I can't do that as much because we have a really good quality product.
Right. Yeah.
It could have been, yeah.
Yeah,
the
I don't
corn
know.
chip
I
stuff.
just notice if I eat a lot of if I eat enough carbohydrates in my diet in the form of like roots and tubers and things like that, like sweet potatoes and yada yada, that I don't really have any sugar cravings or like carbohydrate cravings. So I could quite easily pick up a bag of like corn chips now and eat 4 of them and put them back down. I don't have an issue with that because I'm like I keep my glycogen stores high.
That's
So
good.
whereas like before when I was doing the Wilson diet and I was like, I think it was like quinoa and like there was
I
some
can't stand it.
vegetables in there, but other than that, it was like corn chips, quinoa, and that was that was about it, I think. Back in those days, I don't remember there being too many other like carbs that you
No,
could.
because you're supposed to be able to be full from eating all of the vegetables,
Right,
but I rarely found that even when I was on keto.
right.
And I used to eat heaps of vegetables, but I was still starving afterwards, and then I would overcompensate and to eat too much meat.
Right. Yeah. So,
Anyway,
so
it worked for
John,
him.
so what is your diet these days, John? I mean, like, are you drinking like,
He has been listening to Repeat.
Yes, that's why I'm
I listened to Ray Peat because, well, firstly, Pip was like, John, you got to listen to Ray Peat because I guess apparently
Because of you.
yeah, I listened to it because Pippa was telling me about him. And then the more I'm listening to him, I was already talking about a lot of the things he was talking about. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's probably why she wanted me to listen to him, right? So lately I've been really keen on milk. I haven't been so much on...
He's not going to drink Coca-Cola.
Yeah, I'm not going to drink Coca-Cola. I
For
personally...
people who don't know what's happening,
Ray Peat likes Coca-Cola.
he likes sugar, and he doesn't discriminate where it comes from.
So I think sugars are important. I think they're important for the thyroid.
Chemicals are not.
Yeah. My diet, though, pretty much has been We keep it pretty simple. Lately we've been eating a lot of
We
veg.
love our blue corn
Yeah,
because we have a good sauce. We're very lucky.
I personally like the tortillas better. I haven't been eating so much of the chips lately.
I personally feel like I should eat more of the tortillas.
See, we're a little different, even though we live,
I am a
together.
bit lazy.
But we have been doing a lot of root vegetables lately. One of the big things we've been doing more commonly was been just white potato. I feel like that's gotten a little demonized. I've eaten
I'm
so
not so
much.
sure that I should be eating it, but I'm trying because I used to love it. And I'm still not 100% that I should be eating as much as I am, but I really went off sweet potato because I was like living on it last year, like sweet potato and greens and sauerkraut and parmesan cheese, and it used to be my go-to meal, and now I've eaten too much. So I kind of am welcoming having the white potato, but then John's also telling me the mineral content of it, so
Lately, my major thing with the diet, personally, has been balancing the calcium to phosphorus ratio. And I feel at least the ideal is in the diet is probably about 2. And a lot of the foods that I choose to eat usually help balance that. I haven't been so keen on like discriminating against toxic potassium personally. I think, potassium is found in foods, so I eat it. I'm aware oxides are not good for the body, but as far as I know, not normally oxides in vegetables anyway. So my major thing for the diet, I mean, I do supplement, but I take in a lot of potassium lately. And when it comes to like, say I eat a food that's not necessarily the best ever, it might have, we had sausages the other day, and so much fat came out of
yeah,
this
they weren't good.
sausage. I'm
Or a
biting
lamb
again,
sausage.
but I don't even
We
know
were
if it
just
was
trying
lamb
a new
fat,
place.
right? So in a circumstance like that, where I feel like the butcher probably just like dumped oil in the sausage and sold it. I don't know. I'm not too happy about it, but I've been taking like vitamin E to kind of counteract things like that. That's just one of the things I've been doing. I've been doing lots of milk. I've been really fond of milk lately.
Oh, he swapped from yogurt to milk.
Yeah. I used to be really big on Greek yogurt, and lately it's just been just milk. I still eat lots of vegetables. Don't really discriminate very many of them, really. What about you, Pip?
I do a lot of things like white sweet potatoes. I hate yellow sweet potatoes, but I like white sweet potatoes. I do a lot of potatoes. I do a lot of like butternut squashes and things like that. Uh, I I like liver. I do liver on a regular basis.
Well, you have to share your recipe with John.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to share my
I'm still working on a really good recipe for it because I did it once, but I only ever did it once. And I used to take the supplements before, and it's such an economical food. So I'm really into eating the whole food now.
The key to cooking liver is you just can't cook it for very long. If you overcook it, it'll just be rubbery and taste disgusting. So you have to do it on a low heat for a short period of time.
Okay.
He
So
soaked his in milk for like 2 hours beforehand.
You soak it in milk
I
to
don't bother.
displace the iron?
No, I don't
No?
bother with that.
Okay.
So I just eat it as is. I can't be doing that stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I still don't think I can.
I don't do a lot of dairy because I don't do so well with dairy. It tends to make me kind of phlegmy right now, so I kind of avoid it for the time being. Like every so often I'll have something that's got some dairy in it, but I don't eat a lot of dairy. I wish I could because I would be eating it all the time. I live in hopes that I'll get there one day. And then what else do I eat? So I eat a lot of vegetables. I do a lot of greens. I love like things like rainbow chard and Swiss chard and pak choy and pak sam, like so a lot of Chinese green vegetables, and
Yeah.
I don't really do kale. I don't like kale. It's way too bloody chewy and like it doesn't.
Fibrous.
Chewy.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. I really like kale. I think it's like this nice balance between spinach and lettuce.
I prefer the rainbow chard.
Yeah.
Like
I
you're
like
saying.
chard. I don't
Yeah.
know. I feel like kale's kind of similar.
Like kale, you have to cook it for so long, otherwise it's just kind of like chewing like a piece of
Well, I
meat.
prepare mine, so I usually cut all the stalks out the middle of the chards and the kales and everything, and then chop them up and put them into a box.
Right,
And then I just cook the leaves.
right,
And then later when I make stir fries or whatever, or a casserole, I just chuck the stems in.
right. Yeah,
So, I don't know.
yeah, that
I,
sounds
I don't
complicated.
mind it. It's actually not, because it keeps longer in the fridge when you buy all of your chard and
Right,
kale, and you just quickly chop all of the leaf off and put the leaf in one section, and then throw all of your fibrous bits into a bowl, and it just keeps in the fridge.
yeah. Yeah, no,
That's what I
I
was doing when
don't,
I was living alone anyway.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe again, it takes me back to those raw food days where I used to eat kettle salad.
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's you guys ate too much.
A big
Been there.
bowl, big huge bowl of kale mixed with
I've really
avocado.
gone off carrots
Right.
and zucchini. I went off zucchini
Right.
because I had too much like zucchini noodles, and now I'm
Oh.
like,
We had zucchini the last couple of days.
yeah. But if I cook it in something, but not try and use it as a noodle.
She doesn't
or
like it as a
yeah.
staple lately.
Okay. Yeah.
But that
I just-
our diet's changed though over time.
Yeah, and plus we're in the middle of summer,
Right. Yeah. So,
So-
it's different for you guys, I'm in the
and
middle.
we're in Australia. Yeah,
Right.
I've been
Yeah.
having a lot of coconut water, but
Right.
I cut it with spring water, and then when I can afford it, I have tart cherry concentrates, and then I also put in my powdered supplements, and I basically have like a sports drink.
Right.
Yeah, it's got potassium and stuff, but I need it because it's just so hot right here, right now.
Yeah. Still adapting. It's crazy.
I don't drink it in winter. Just
Right.
like my San Pellegrino and the sulfur, I really crave the sulfur in summer, but I don't drink it in winter.
Right.
Things I've noticed.
We're a little bit past our time. Do you want to call
No,
it
we're
a
not.
day?
We started recording at 7:30.
Oh,
Remember?
okay. I thought we were.
Because don't you have the half hour where you chat?
Well, we had the
No?
half hour we chatted. Do we have any more questions? Because, you know,
I'll look at the thing. If Magda has a question, we'll pick it up.
I don't know. This is your thing.
Really, the major last question was, could you talk about calcium-magnesium ratio and how one may address hypoglycemia using nutritional balancing? We kind of covered a little bit about that when I talked about the minerals and things like that to use. The one thing I would say is that chromium is pretty much usually found very low on a hair test. It does elevate when someone's been supplementing high amounts of it, but between chromium and manganese especially, I think those are a little bit harder for those on an MB program, mostly because chromium, I mean, if you use chronometer, it doesn't really pick up chromium as a food-based nutrient, mostly I think because the government didn't really test that one. I'm not sure why. But it's also really hard to correlate anyway in diets because it's only absorbed like 30% of whatever you eat. So to me, I think chromium supplementation is really good if you're in a hypoglycemic state. The other one would be to consider maybe adding a little sugars in if you could. Use that taurine because that taurine will help with the insulin uptake and things like that. It's the lesser known aspect of taurine. As far as hypothyroidism goes, hypothyroidism you need to consider is like the end stage of imbalances. Usually you go into a hyperthyroid state and then you go into a hypothyroid state. It's pretty common that the body goes overactive and then underactive. So taking too much kelp could put you into hypothyroidism. I mean, if you're following the Wilson program, which I'm not sure if Daniel is, you might want to consider your iodine intake. The other thing is balancing that calcium to phosphorus ratio, which is pretty much your autonomic nervous state, right? So if you're always constantly in a sympathetic state, which is you're doing things, you might want to try and balance that with different relaxation techniques, which I know Wilson adds, like reflexology and the sauna. Maybe just even the infrared lamp might help, because that raises the basal temperature of the body, which will help the thyroid. That's what I got. Do you have any idea, Pippa? Hypoglycemia, thyroidism, hypothyroidism, using
Well,
nutritional balancing?
the correlation between the two.
Yeah, or any way of the question how to address it. So do you have like any ideas on that?
I think it's not particularly nutritional balancing advice, but I mean I know that Ray Peat suggests that you keep your blood sugar like as high as possible. So if you're hypoglycemic and hypothyroid, then I believe that he suggests that you eat, every 2 to 3 hours, that you don't ever let your blood sugar drop too low. And that basically keeps your metabolism kind of ticking over and helps your thyroid production as well. So, but that's all I've really got to say about that.
Yeah, I agree, really. I think Ray Peat's onto something. I just think I'm not too keen on all that sugar.
Yeah, no. Well,
But
I think that's when it comes down to having something that's a little bit like now it feels like I eat more of a balanced diet and I'm getting enough like starches and carbohydrates in. But his whole thing about that is endotoxin. When you have hypothyroidism, you're not breaking down your food properly in your gut, and therefore you end up with endotoxin that irritates with your gut lining, and then that's like a whole that adds the whole new snowball effect to your health. So that's one of the reasons why he's really into like more the simple sugars like the orange juice and things like that, because there's no fiber with it. But I personally I think, as you said, when you don't have fiber in your diet, that has its own issue, that brings its own slew of health issues as well. So I don't agree.
Why doesn't he recommend eating whole oranges?
huh?
Why doesn't he recommend eating the whole orange?
Do you know, Pip?
Because of the fiber.
The fiber.
So he doesn't like fiber.
Yeah,
He's
he doesn't
really
like.
anti-microbe, it seems.
Yeah, he
Too much
to think that like the less he thinks that fiber actually irritates our gut lining, and that for the most part plants put out toxins in order for us.
yeah, I've heard that side before.
So
Well, a lot of sugars, glyconutrients, things like that, glycosides, I think they're called, and there's a couple of different ones, like that are in aloe vera and things like that, are sugars that are used medicinally. And I mean, in herbalism, we use a lot of those plant defenses to help with diseases. So I just always think it's interesting how much he doesn't like them, but
right, there is a little.
Let's turn a little bit into the Ray Peat hour.
yes, the Ray Peat hour.
The NB people are here are going, wait, who's Ray Peat?
Right, yeah. So there is I just wanted to mention, there is actually like a little contraption that you can use these days. It's called oh my God, now what's the actual name of it? But basically, I'll find the name of it whilst we're talking. But basically, it's a continuous blood sugar glucose monitor that you put on your arm, and it basically measures your blood sugar after all of your meals, so you can actually tell what effect foods are having on you.
Yeah, that sounds like a biohacker device.
Yeah, so it's but the thing is with it is that, hold on, I'm just trying to find it because I was looking at them the other day. But the thing with them, if you're in the UK, you can't get them in the UK because because they're so in demand. They use them for diabetes. They're called a Libre Freestyle. There's a starter pack, and you get like a sensor that you put on, and basically the sensor just tracks your blood sugar throughout your 24 hours, and you'd use it for 2 weeks, so you can kind of see what you have a reaction to, because some people can be fine with like a banana, but like somebody else might have a banana, it might really spike your blood glucose and things like that. So the idea is that different people have reactions, blood sugar stability with different foods, and so therefore you can kind of monitor and see what you have what foods cause you a reaction.
Or you can just learn to listen to your own body.
Yeah, you could do that as well.
Well, your body
That's
can
the
be
only issue I
deceptive.
have with devices like that.
Exactly.
It sort of stops you from observing yourself.
Yeah, but the thing is after a while, when you get further down the blood sugar path of like either hypo or hyper, your body, the feedback loop isn't as reactive anymore. So when I was
True.
younger and I would have blood sugar drops, I would get really shaky and it would be really obvious I'd had a blood sugar drop. Whereas these days I don't tend to have that. I don't get the shakiness so much anymore. I'll just notice that my pulse starts to pick up, but I don't notice that until I start to feel anxious, by which time I've gone.
It's too late.
It's too late. Yeah, I've already been triggered into a stress response. So I think it can actually be a really great tool for people to kind of see how they respond.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like their meals, so they can kind of get a little bit more of an idea of like how to eat in order to keep their blood sugar regulated.
I think it's important to do both really. I think if you can test. I personally, it's still the blood sugar, right? And it doesn't really address the cellular production of energy.
Yeah.
So that's why I still kind of hair testing is a very valuable tool. If you were to get a blood test, I do think the blood A1C is helpful. If you have a lot of blood sugar imbalances, usually like when you get to the state you're at, and you were saying that you kind of lose
awareness. It's called hypoglycemia unawareness, basically.
Yeah. So you kind of
the diagnosis for it.
Is that an actual one?
Yes, an actual diagnosis.
Wow. It's very scientific, that sounds.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I was touching on like earlier, just with the external stress with the vagus nerve and the nervous system, I think that's where the vagus nerve comes in, because the vagus nerve is responsible for the reciprocity from the body up to the brain. So it delivers basically the information from your pancreas and your blood supply and things like that to your brain, so that the brain knows what's up. I'm not saying that Pippa is her brain, but when your nervous system is constantly in that sympathetic state, what happens is it's called afferent and efferent neurons. So afferent's when information comes from the body up to the brain, and efferent's when it comes from the brain down to the body. From what I found is that the afferent neurons actually kind of get desensitized. So when you have inflammation of all kinds, you don't really notice it so much. It just kind of takes its kind of around the back burner kind of thing. And it's not like it immediately noticeable. So I can see why they would call it what is it, hypoglycemia unawareness?
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't be aware of that actually happening. Like, I think it's like a systemic inflammation kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I will become aware of it over a period of time. I don't have the markers that I used to have. Like when I was 11, I would I'd literally be walking home from school, my hands would start shaking, and then I'd know it was time to run home and shove a Mars bar in my face. So how I dealt with it back in those days.
Yeah.
So.
All right. I think we'll wrap it up, this call.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks for coming, Pip. It's always a pleasure talking.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Thanks, guys. I was listening. I wasn't speaking while I was listening. I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Bye, Magda.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.